Hello, everybody. Brian Keeler here. I'm in Rome, and near the ancient Jewish district, in our apartment during the Rome workshops. And our instructor, Michael Bergt, is working on a tempera painting that he is working from a sketch that he did from a live model during our class, and that was last week. And he's working it up into a small tempera painting. The model was Lucia, one of the administrators at the school, and she posed for Michael during our class. So it's been a great workshop. I can endorse it highly. It was inspiring in many ways, and we're going to chat with Michael here a little bit. We're going to take a break there. Michael.
Yeah, so here, if you want to take a look, this is the drawing that I did from the life of Lucia. And then I did a tracing, and I copied it on the panel here. This panel is a true chalk gesso, which is a mixture of rabbit skin glue and calcium carbonate. This is the tradition used in the early Italian Renaissance. Those of you who may not be familiar with egg tempera have probably seen it, but you didn't know the painting was done in egg tempera. Like nearly all the paintings done by Botticelli until his later life were all egg tempera. Fra Angelico, the same thing, Piero della Francesca, many of the early Italians, up until about 1475, that was the primary medium. And there are two things that are sort of distinctive about egg tempera. I mean, it dries very quickly and it has a higher color key. So essentially it is the closest thing to drawing in paint that you can find. And with the invention of oil, what happened is you could actually blend colors more easily because the paint stayed wet for a longer period of time. And also because the pigment was saturated with oil, it had a deeper color saturation. So egg tempera actually has more in common with fresco painting than it does oil painting in terms of the color key. It's a little bit more vibrant, it's a little livelier, and many of the early egg tempera paintings would incorporate that, and they would do paintings that had a lot of vermilion or lapis lazuli or pinks, colors that were really vibrant, and there was almost a jewel-like quality to them. But again, I'm a very traditionalist in terms of the tradition adopted from icon painting would be very sort of linear with cross-hatching, because the only way to get the blending, because the paint dried so quickly, was to cross-hatch. And so it's very much of the people who work in pencil understand this technique of cross-hatching to create a gradation. So that's essentially what I have here. But here, this is sort of a good time to look at this painting because you can see the underpainting was done in a green tone. I then did an overall glaze of an ochre on top of that, and now I'm working in red ochre on top of that. Now, once I get this modeling done in the red, I'll go back in with a sort of toned down white and begin to create more highlights and actually start to break down some of the hatching. But it creates a very sort of luminous and smooth surface when you start working. And there's a difference in tempera than oil in that you can work white on top of a painting and you're not making it, you're not killing it, you're not creating a painting that has a kind of an opacity to it, because often you will take and you push your highlights a little bit lighter so that you can go on top and glaze it and you get that luminosity back. So tempera painting, when it's done, according to the characteristics, is a very luminous medium. It's very long lasting. Also, because there's very little binder in it, there's very little binding strength to the yolk of an egg, you can't work it in an impasto method. You can't, like oil painting, you can actually see the brush strokes and build up the thickness of the paint. In egg tempera, you're working in very thin, semi-transparent layers, so you're always mindful of what the underpainting is, and you're always playing off of that underpainting. And so in this case, the flesh tone, it's very wise to start with a green tone because it's the complementary color to red. So you're working complementary colors. Often you're working opaque and transparent, and you're just playing layer on layer on top of one another to build up the surface until you're to the point where you can just be very defined about what your highest highlights and darkest darks are. So it's kind of a brief summary and so
Yeah.
the tradition and history of egg tempera
It's
painting.
fascinating. Could you explain a little bit about actually getting the egg separated from the white part?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't know that you're using only the yolk of the egg, because that's the most binders in the yolk of the egg. There was a period when they were doing something called tempera grassa, which is a mixture of oil and egg, and often they would use the whole egg in that one because the white would help in the emulsification of it. But generally speaking, you don't want any of the yolk, and the binder is just like in watercolor, it's gum arabic. And oil, it's linseed oil. In egg tempera, it is the yolk of the egg. That's the binder in the medium, and it's thinned with water, so it's a water-based medium.
Yeah, that's one thing I was wondering about. We did glazes in class with a lot of water, but that's okay.
Yeah, no. Once you have the pigment itself tempered to the right consistency, you can thin it as much as you want, and you're not losing that binding strength.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
So I did glazes on our work in class, and we would go over our hatching, and it dries very quickly, so it has a great advantage over oil painting. Like you think of the work of Maxfield Parrish, where you'd have to wait, a week between glazes. With tempera, you could do it in a few minutes.
That's actually one of the reasons why I started using it, because I was experimenting early on trying to replicate Old Master tradition, which would have been a lot of glazing. And I was working in oil, and it became very frustrating to just do a little bit of painting and then glaze it, and then having to wait a day or two for it to set up enough to start painting the next layer. And in this case, with egg tempera, you can do all that within half an hour.
And maybe if you explain a little bit about the ground and how you do that. It has to be mixed very methodically. You sift it and so forth. And
yeah, I mean, one of the things that stops, I think, a lot of people from using egg tempera is because of the traditional ground. They really, art stores right now don't sell traditional chalk gesso ground, and so most artists learn to do it themselves, or find some other thing that imitates the characteristic. But because it's a mixture of raviskin glue and calcium carbonate, you have to take the pebbles or the grain of raviskin, you soak it overnight, that swells up into a slurry, and then you heat that to no more than 110 degrees, usually in a double boiler, and then into that you sift 3 cups of whiting, and that slowly absorbs into the raviskin glue, and that becomes the gesso you use. You have to put it on when it's still warm, because once it cools to room temperature, it'll solidify.
and what is the whiting? Calcium carbonate?
Calcium carbonate is basically chalk. It's like gypsum.
And you can get that anywhere? Or?
I mean, almost all fine art supplies you can find calcium carbonate, and some people will incorporate marble dust or titanium if they want a ground that has a little bit more brilliance or slightly different characteristics. They'll sort of temper it actually with some other materials, but it's the volume to raviskin glue remains the same.
And the application, you use a spray gun for yours?
This is obviously a modern invention, because traditionally they were brushing on multiple layers. I mean, there are theories that you need to do 8, 12 layers of gesso because you want to build up the ground. But actually, I learned this mostly through contemporary gold leaf frame makers. They spray it on. You put it in a canister, a spray canister, and in a pool of hot water to keep the gesso in a warm state, and then you spray it on. I've usually found about 3 layers, because you can get a nice even layer by spraying it. 3 layers is a good amount, and then you just lightly sand that last layer.
But for those of us without that spraying device, we can spray it whatever.
You can just use the old method of just brushing, and then it's just any other gesso, you do in one direction, another direction, and another direction to build it up.
And you just try to sand it in between each coat to...
Some people do in between, but I kind of feel what that does is it makes it where you add and you're taking away, add and taking away. So if you sort of do all the layers and then sand that last one, you might not lose so much gesso that way.
Okay, so that's better. And you're working on a masonite panel, is that correct?
Yeah, this is sort of a modern use, and this is like this is the first spray coat that I put on the back to sort of stabilize it, so you can kind of see how
Looks
thin.
like the one coat.
Yeah, this is a thin that's like one coat of gesso, and then by 3 coats it looks like
Yeah.
this.
Wow, these are beautiful, beautiful drawing, very sensitive, and it was wonderful to watch him work from the model in class last week, and then to see how he works it up into a study here, and these cross hatchings are just beautiful and very articulate and nuanced and.
For me, I love it because I'm someone who loves drawing, and I love sort of Duru and cross hatching, that whole tradition, and
Yeah.
and early Italian Renaissance art.
Yeah, if you think of Durer and those American painters too, like Paul Cadmus and Thomas R. Benton and John Stuart Curry, is he also part
I
of
don't think he used it, but he was
okay.
of that sort of American scene tradition.
Yeah.
Who was using that kind of work.
So
Yeah.
we have our,
Reginald Marsh. There's some
Reginald
Reginald
Marsh, yeah.
would use a template.
So we have the American tradition and the Renaissance tradition. So it's been great to be here in Rome studying with Michael. His imagery is great too. What is your website?
It's just michaelbertart.com.
Okay. And Michael's a Denver-based painter. I've known of him for decades. I first became acquainted with him through the efforts of John O'Hearn, who was the director of the Arnott Museum in Elmira, and of course I've seen his work published in lots of places too. And you just did a workshop at the Portrait Society in near DC?
Yeah, I was one of the members, and you do the paint out together on Thursday, and then you do breakout class on Saturday. So I was one of the artists doing a breakout class on tempera painting at the Portrait Society.
Okay, so it's been great to be here in Rome with Michael and all the other people at the Rome workshops, and thanks so much for your attention. Cheers.
Ciao.
Ciao.